Sometimes life takes everything from you. Your partner, your savings, your sense of purpose. For Sam Ridley, rock bottom came with a choice. Give up or take one last chance on hope. When the town offered him a ruined mansion for 50 cents, everyone called him a fool. The place had been abandoned for decades, buried in weeds and shadows. But Sam just needed a roof over his son's head and a reason to keep going. Then his dog Ranger found a sealed cellar door hidden beneath the rubble. Inside were journals, blueprints, and tools from a craftsman who never finished his dream. What they discovered would rebuild more than just walls. It would restore a father's heart and bring a forgotten town back to life. What was waiting in that cellar all those years? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The bus dropped Sam Ridley and his son Julian at the edge of Riverside Bend on a grey Tuesday morning in late September. 3 years had passed since Lydia died, and in those 3 years, Sam had watched everything they'd built together crumble like old mortar. The woodworking business went first, sold to pay medical bills that kept coming long after the funeral. Then the house, the workshop, the truck. Now here they stood with 2 duffel bags, a rescue dog named Ranger, and exactly $217 between them and the street. Julian shifted his bag higher on his shoulder. At 27, he should have been starting his own life, building his own career. Instead, he was standing in a town he'd never heard of, watching his father pretend everything would be fine. "It's smaller than I thought," Julian said, looking down the main street. Half the storefronts were empty, their windows covered with faded newspaper. A hardware store, a diner, a church with peeling paint. The kind of place people left, not the kind they moved to. Sam pulled Lydia's old brass compass from his pocket, a habit he'd developed. She'd carried it everywhere, said it reminded her that even when you're lost, you can still find your way. He rubbed his thumb across the worn metal. "Town clerk said the property's at the north end." "We can walk it." Ranger trotted ahead, his tail wagging despite the drizzle starting to fall. The dog had more optimism than either of them deserved. The Fairmont estate sat behind a wall of overgrown hedge and rusted iron gates. Sam stopped at the entrance, staring up at the structure beyond. 3 stories of Victorian Gothic architecture, grey stone darkened by decades of neglect. Windows broken or boarded, roof sagging in places, vines crawling up every surface like the forest was trying to reclaim what humans had abandoned. "Dad," Julian said quietly, "we can't live here. We can fix it." "With what?" "We don't have money for materials. We don't have electricity or running water. Winter's coming." Julian's voice cracked slightly. "This is insane." Sam pushed through the gates. The hinges screamed. "I've rebuilt worse." That wasn't true, and they both knew it. But what else was there? They'd exhausted every other option, burned through every favor, every connection. This 50-cent property was the last door left to knock on. The town clerk had explained it during their phone call last week. Some legal relic from the 1960s, a land grant program nobody remembered existed until they were digitizing old records. The Fairmont estate qualified. Any able-bodied person willing to restore it could claim tenancy for 50 cents. The catch, and there was always a catch, was that you actually had to restore it, make it livable, prove you weren't just squatting. They climbed the front steps, testing each board before putting their full weight down. The main door hung crooked on broken hinges. Sam pushed it open and stepped into darkness that smelled of rot and animal nests and time itself. Julian pulled out his phone, using the flashlight to cut through the gloom. The beam revealed a grand entrance hall, or what had been grand once. A staircase curved upward, its banister missing sections like a mouth missing teeth. Wallpaper hung in strips. The chandelier lay shattered on the floor, crystals scattered like ice. But underneath the decay, Sam could see the bones of something beautiful. The proportions were right. The craftsmanship in the remaining woodwork spoke of a builder who understood his materials, who'd cared about every detail. "Look at that joint work," Sam said, moving to where the staircase met the wall. Even after decades of neglect, the joinery was tight, precise. "Whoever built this knew what they were doing." Julian said nothing. He was probably thinking about his own abandoned dreams, the architecture degree he'd put on hold to take care of his increasingly depressed father. Sam knew his son resented him for it, even if Julian was too kind to say so out loud. They spent the rest of that day doing basic reconnaissance. The second floor was mostly intact, though everything needed cleaning and repair. The third floor was worse. Roof damage had let weather in for years. But 2 rooms on the second floor were salvageable. They could sleep there at least, once they'd cleared out the debris and dead birds. That evening, they sat on the front steps, sharing a cold sandwich from the diner in town. The owner, a woman named Doreen Sanchez, had given them extra when she'd heard where they were staying. "You're the fools bought the Fairmont place," she'd said, not unkindly. "Good luck with that. What do you think Mom would say?" Julian asked, staring out at the overgrown gardens. Sam considered the question. Lydia had always been the practical one, the planner. She would have run the numbers, made spreadsheets, approached this systematically. But she'd also believed in him when no one else did. When he'd wanted to quit his construction job to start the woodworking business, she'd been the one to push him forward. "She'd say we're idiots," Sam admitted. "Then she'd roll up her sleeves and help anyway." Julian almost smiled. Almost. The town clerk, Bonnie Fletcher, arrived the next morning with paperwork and a thermos of coffee. She was 62, practical as a hammer, with grey hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that didn't miss much. 50 cents, she said, laying out the documents on a board they'd balanced across 2 crates. "Payment in full for tenancy rights to the Fairmont estate, contingent on restoration and maintenance." "Sign here, and initial here," Sam signed. His hand shook slightly, whether from nerves or coffee on an empty stomach he couldn't tell. Bonnie poured them both cups from her thermos. "People think you're crazy, you know. This place has been empty since 1963. Nathaniel Fairmont built it, then vanished before finishing. Some say he died somewhere out west. Others say he just walked away. Either way, the place has been rotting ever since." "Why didn't the town tear it down?" Julian asked. "Legal tangles. The Fairmont Family Trust had provisions nobody could sort out. Easier to let it sit than fight lawyers." She looked around the entrance hall. "Besides, some of us remember Nathaniel. He was a good man. Tragic story. Lost his fiancée right before the wedding. After that, something broke in him. He kept building, but his heart wasn't in it anymore." Sam felt something tighten in his chest. He knew exactly how that felt. After Lydia died, he'd tried to keep working, but every piece of furniture he built felt hollow. The craft required more than skill. It required caring about the outcome. And for a long time, Sam hadn't cared about anything. Bonnie stood, brushing dust from her slacks. "There's an inscription above the front door. Outside, near the top. You probably didn't notice it under all the vines. Built with purpose, finished with love." Nathaniel carved that himself. She paused at the door. "Hope you two can finish what he started." After she left, Sam and Julian stood outside, craning their necks to see the inscription. The letters were barely visible beneath decades of growth, but they were there, carved deep, meant to last. "Built with purpose," Julian read aloud. "Finished with love." Sam pulled out Lydia's compass again, feeling its weight in his palm. Maybe that was the problem. After she died, he'd lost his purpose. And without purpose, there was nothing to finish, no love to pour into the work. But maybe, just maybe, this place could change that. Ranger barked suddenly, running toward the side of the house. The dog had been exploring the grounds all morning, but this was different, urgent. "What did you find, boy?" Sam called, following. The dog stood at the edge of what had once been a courtyard, now overgrown with weeds and saplings. He was pawing at something near an old stone fountain, barking insistently. Julian caught up, breathing hard. "What's he doing?" Sam knelt beside Ranger, pushing aside vines and debris. Underneath, the stone foundation looked different. Newer mortar, or at least less weathered. He ran his hand along the edge and felt it, a seam barely visible. "There's something here," he said. "Hand me that crowbar." It took both of them 20 minutes to pry loose the stones. Behind them was a wooden door, sealed with iron bands, and a lock that had rusted solid. The wood itself was old, but had been protected from the weather. Someone had hidden this deliberately. "Should we break it open?" Julian asked. Sam looked at his son. really looked at him for the first time in months. Julian's eyes held something they hadn't held in a long time. Curiosity, interest, maybe even a spark of excitement. "Yeah," Sam said. "Let's see what's inside." They worked together, father and son, prying and levering until the old lock finally gave way with a shriek of protesting metal. The door swung inward, revealing darkness and the smell of old wood and dust. Sam shined his phone light inside. The beam caught tool handles, metal gleaming, paper rolled and stacked. A whole room, preserved beneath the courtyard, untouched for decades. "Dad," Julian whispered. "What is this place?" Sam stepped inside, his light sweeping across walls hung with hand tools, saws, planes, chisels, all arranged with care. A drafting table sat in the center, and on it, held down by stones, were blueprints. Dozens of them. And on a shelf near the back, a stack of leather-bound journals. Sam picked up the top journal, opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was precise, measured. The first page read, "The Journal of Nathaniel Fairmont. If you're reading this, then perhaps you're the one meant to finish what I could not." Julian moved beside him, reading over his shoulder. This is impossible, but it wasn't impossible. It was real. Nathaniel had left them a message across 60 years, a message waiting for someone desperate enough, broken enough, to need what he'd left behind. Sam turned the page, his hands steady now, his purpose suddenly powerfully clear. They had work to do. Sam and Julian spent the first week doing nothing but reading. The journals filled in pieces of a story the town had forgotten, or never fully knew. Nathaniel Fairmont had been a master builder, trained in traditional methods by his grandfather. He'd returned from Korea in 1954 with plans to create something meaningful, something that would last. He'd met Abigail Morrison in 1959. The journals described her in careful detail, an artist who painted landscapes, a woman who saw beauty in broken things. They'd planned to marry in the spring of 1961. This estate was meant to be their home, designed with spaces for his workshop and her studio, rooms for the children they'd hoped to have. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, Abigail had died. Her car accident on a wet road, sudden and senseless. Nathaniel's entries after that date became sparse, mechanical. He kept building because he didn't know what else to do, but the joy had bled out of the work. The final entry was dated September 1963. "I cannot finish this house. Every room echoes with her absence. Every board I place feels like a lie. A home needs love to make it whole, and I have none left to give. Perhaps someday someone will find these plans and understand what I meant to build. Perhaps they'll have the heart to complete it. I hope so. I truly do." Sam closed the journal, his throat tight. He understood Nathaniel better than he wanted to. After Lydia died, he'd felt the same way, like continuing was dishonest, like pretending to build a future was an insult to the past. Julian sat across from him at the makeshift table they'd set up in the least damaged room. "These blueprints are incredible, Dad. Look at this detail." He spread out one of the large sheets, weighting the corners with stones. He designed every element, the trim work, the built-in furniture, even the garden layout. This wasn't just a house. It was a complete vision, a vision he couldn't finish. "No," Julian said slowly. "But we could." Sam looked up sharply. His son's face held an expression he hadn't seen in years, determination mixed with something like hope. Julian had been so lost after dropping out of architecture school, so uncertain about his direction. Caring for a depressed father wasn't a career path. It was a pause button on life. "We don't have the money," Sam said. "These materials, this level of detail, it would cost a fortune. We have the tools. We have the plans. And we have time." Julian tapped the blueprint. "Everything we need to know is right here. Nathaniel left us a complete instruction manual. We just have to follow it." Over the next few days, they catalogued everything in the hidden workshop. The tools were old, but well-maintained, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them. Saws that still held their edge, planes that fit perfectly in the hand, chisels ranging from broad to hair-fine, everything a master carpenter would need. The blueprints showed the estate as Nathaniel had imagined it, every room detailed, every measurement precise. There were spaces they hadn't even discovered yet, rooms hidden behind walls or accessible only through passages the overgrowth had concealed. But one element appeared in drawing after drawing, always with extra notation, always circled or starred, a large ballroom on the east side of the house. Nathaniel had never started it. The space existed only as foundation and framing, open to the weather. Sam found a separate journal dedicated entirely to the ballroom, page after page of sketches, calculations, material lists, and scattered throughout, notes in a different hand, smaller, more flowing. Abigail's handwriting. The ballroom should face east, she'd written in the margin of one sketch. Morning light is kindest. It makes everything look possible. Another note. Windows tall enough to make you feel like you could fly. We'll dance here, Nate. We'll celebrate every moment we get. Sam had to set the journal down. His hands were shaking. Julian found him an hour later sitting on the front steps in the cold. You okay? He built this whole place for her, Sam said. Every nail, every board. It was all meant to be a gift. And then she was gone, and the gift didn't mean anything anymore. Julian sat beside him. They'd never been good at talking about feelings, the Ridley men. After Lydia died, they'd both retreated into silence, letting grief fill the space where words should have been. Do you think that's true? Julian asked finally. That it didn't mean anything? What else could it mean? She never saw it. She never got to live in it. But we're seeing it. We're here. Julian picked up a small stone, turning it over in his hands. Maybe the meaning changes. Maybe Nathaniel built it for her, but now it means something different. Something he never expected. Sam wanted to argue, but he was too tired. The past week had been nothing but basic repairs. Patching the roof well enough to keep rain out of their sleeping area, clearing debris, making the place minimally habitable. His body ached in ways it hadn't in years. He was 50 years old and felt every day of it.
I don't know if I can do this, he admitted.
Look at this place, Julian. It's too much. It's too big, too broken. I'm one man with no money and a pile of old tools. You're not one man, Julian said quietly. I'm here too. Something in his son's voice made Sam look over. Julian was staring at the estate, but his expression wasn't one of defeat. It was calculation, the same look he used to get when working on architecture projects before he dropped out. I've been thinking, Julian continued, about what Nathaniel wrote, about finishing with love. Maybe that's the part he couldn't figure out. How to love something when the person you built it for is gone. He paused. But maybe we don't have to love it the same way he did. Maybe we just have to care about doing it right. About honoring what he started. That's still love, Sam said. Just a different kind. Yeah, I guess it is. They sat in silence as the sun dropped below the tree line. Ranger wandered over and collapsed between them with a satisfied grunt. The dog had been exploring every corner of the property, seemed perfectly content with their new situation. At least someone was. The town thinks we're insane, Sam said. The town thought Nathaniel was insane too, probably. Doesn't matter what they think. Julian stood, brushing off his jeans. I'm going to start measuring the ballroom foundation tomorrow. If we're doing this, we should start with the hardest part. The part he never could finish. Sam watched his son walk back inside, shoulders squared with purpose. When had that happened? When had Julian stopped being the lost kid who'd put his life on hold and become someone with direction again? Maybe the same moment Sam had stopped being a man waiting to die and become a builder again. He pulled out Lydia's compass, checked its bearing in the fading light. The needle pointed north, steady and true. She'd always said that about him, that he was her true north, the thing she could count on when everything else was uncertain. He'd failed that standard after she died, let himself drift, let the compass spin uselessly. But maybe Julian was right. Maybe the meaning could change. Maybe being someone's true north didn't end just because they were gone. Sam stood, pocketed the compass and followed his son inside. They had blueprints to study and plans to make. Nathaniel Fairmont had left them more than tools and drawings. He'd left them a purpose, and Sam Ridley was finally ready to accept it. In the hidden workshop that night, they spread out every blueprint, every journal, every scrap of Nathaniel's vision. The candlelight flickered across decades-old ink, casting shadows that made the drawings seem alive. "Here's what I'm thinking," Julian said, sketching notes on a pad. "We start with structural integrity, roof, windows, basic weatherproofing. That's survival. Then we move through the interior, room by room, following his sequence." He tapped the ballroom drawings. "And we save this for last, when we know what we're doing. When we're ready to do it right," Sam nodded. It was a good plan, patient, methodical, the kind of approach that might actually work. "One more thing," Julian added. He pulled out a blueprint they'd overlooked, one that had been tucked into the back of a journal. It showed a cornerstone, inscribed with initials and a date. "We should find this. Nathaniel always marked his work. If this is here somewhere, it'll tell us more about what he intended." They found it 3 days later while excavating around the foundation. A carved stone set into the corner of the east wing, partially buried by decades of settling soil. The inscription was weathered but still legible: NF and AM 1961. Nathaniel Fairmont and Abigail Morrison. The date they'd planned to marry. "He put her name on the foundation," Julian said softly. "Even after she died, he still built it for both of them." Sam traced the carved letters with his finger. The stone was cold, permanent, a declaration of love that had outlasted the people who made it. "We'll honor this," Sam said. It wasn't a question, it was a promise. To Nathaniel, to Abigail, to Lydia, to himself. "We'll finish what they started, and we'll do it right." Julian placed his hand next to his father's on the stone. "Together." The word hung in the cold November air between them, an oath, a commitment, a bridge across the grief that had separated them for so long. Together. They could do this. They had to. Because sometimes the only way to survive your own broken heart was to rebuild someone else's dream. 2 months into the restoration, Sam and Julian had established a rhythm. They woke with the dawn, worked until their hands were too numb to hold tools, ate whatever Doreen brought from the diner, then studied the blueprints by lamplight until exhaustion pulled them towards sleep. The roof came first. Sam taught Julian how to replace shingles properly, how to read the language of water damage and structural stress. His son learned quickly, had good hands for the work. They discovered Julian's architecture training translated well to practical building. He understood load distribution, could visualize how pieces fit together before they cut a single board. "Your mother would have loved seeing this," Sam said one afternoon, as they fitted new rafters into place. "You up here actually building instead of just drawing." Julian paused, hammer raised. "She never understood why I quit school. She understood. She just didn't agree with your reason." Sam aligned the next board. "You quit to take care of me." That wasn't what she would have wanted. What was I supposed to do? "You weren't eating. You weren't sleeping. Someone had to—" "I know." Sam drove a nail home with 3 solid strikes. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to be the parent while I fell apart." They didn't speak for a while after that. Just worked, the sound of hammers punctuating the silence. But it was a different silence than before. Lighter somehow. Bonnie Fletcher started coming by most mornings, bringing coffee in a battered thermos. She'd stand in the entrance hall watching them work, occasionally offering observations about the building's history. "I remember Nathaniel," she said one day. I was young, maybe 19. He'd come into town for supplies, always had this distant look, like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. "What happened to him?" Julian asked. "The journals just stop. No one knows for sure. One day his truck was gone and he never came back. Some folks said he went west trying to outrun his grief. Others thought he might have done something desperate." She sipped her coffee. "I choose to believe he found some kind of peace eventually. Man deserved that much." She told them about Abigail too, how the young woman had been beloved in town, how her death had devastated everyone who knew her. She painted the most beautiful landscapes, had a show scheduled at a gallery in the city. Never happened, of course. Bonnie's eyes grew distant. "My mother had one of her paintings. A field at sunset, with storm clouds breaking apart. I always thought she painted hope. Even in dark subjects, there was always light somewhere." Sam understood that impulse, finding light in darkness. Wasn't that what they were doing here? taking something broken and coaxing it back toward wholeness. The windows came next. Most were shattered beyond repair, but Sam found a supplier 2 towns over who dealt in salvage. The man gave them a fair price when he heard what they were doing. Restoration work, he'd said approvingly. Not enough people care about doing things right anymore. They installed each window carefully, following Nathaniel's specifications exactly. The man had understood natural light, had positioned every opening to maximize brightness during different times of day. As they worked, the house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a space that could shelter life again. Howard Briggs from the hardware store started extending them credit. Sam had been prepared to beg, but Howard had just waved him off. "Pay me when you can. I've seen too many young families leave this town because there was nothing here for them. Maybe if this place comes back to life, others will too." It was a kindness Sam hadn't expected. The town had seemed so cold at first, so skeptical. But slowly, person by person, Riverside Bend was revealing itself to be more generous than its weathered exterior suggested. Doreen brought food 3 or 4 times a week now, always claiming she'd made too much, always pretending it wasn't charity. Her husband, Andre, who'd retired from contracting, started showing up on weekends with his old tools. He didn't ask permission, just climbed up on scaffolding and started working. "My knees aren't what they used to be," Andre admitted, "but my hands still remember how it's done. Besides, Doreen says you 2 are going to work yourselves to death if someone doesn't help." With Andre's assistance, progress accelerated. They finished the roof completely, replaced all the windows, began tackling the interior rooms. Each space revealed new details of Nathaniel's craftsmanship, hand-carved molding, custom joinery, built-in furniture that showed a level of care most modern builders never attempted. "This is museum-quality work," Julian said, running his hand along a window seat Nathaniel had built into the library. "Every piece is perfect." Sam examined the joints, dovetailed, fitted so precisely you could barely see the seams. He had time. No deadlines, no budget constraints, just a man pouring everything he had into creating something beautiful, even though he knew she'd never see it. Maybe that's why it's so perfect. He wasn't building for her approval anymore. He was building because the work itself mattered. They discovered the library's hidden compartments by accident. Julian was measuring for shelving when his tape measure caught on something, a slight depression in the wood paneling. Pressing it released a spring mechanism, and a section of wall swung inward. Inside was a small space, perhaps 2 feet deep, lined with cedar. And within it, preserved by the aromatic wood, were treasures that made both men catch their breath. Pressed flowers, dozens of them, arranged between sheets of tissue paper. Love letters tied with ribbon, the paper yellowed, but the ink still legible. Photographs of a young couple. Nathaniel dark-haired and serious, Abigail blonde and laughing. And sketches, so many sketches, showing ideas for the estate's decorative elements. Sam lifted one of the letters carefully. The paper was fragile as moth wings. "My dearest Nate," it began. "Today I sketched the rose garden we talked about, the one that will grow wild and sweet along the south wall. I can see it so clearly. I can see all of it. Our whole life, waiting to unfold like petals in spring. I love you more than words can hold. You're Abigail." Julian was looking through the photographs. "They look so happy. How do you go on after losing something like this?" "You don't," Sam said quietly. "Not the same way you were before. You either stop living or you find a different way to live." Which did Nathaniel choose? Sam thought about the unfinished ballroom, the abandoned estate, the journals that ended in despair. I don't think he ever decided. That's why he left. They spent the evening cataloguing everything they'd found. The sketches were remarkable. Abigail had real talent, a delicate touch that brought life to simple drawings of flowers, birds, architectural details. Many of her designs had notes in Nathaniel's handwriting. "Yes, exactly this," or "perfect for the east bedroom." They were collaborators, Julian said. She wasn't just inspiring him. She was actively designing parts of the house. "Then we should use her designs." Sam spread out several sketches. "Where we can, where it makes sense, we incorporate her vision. That's what Nathaniel would have wanted. News of their discovery spread through town faster than they expected. Bonnie mentioned it to someone at the post office, who told someone at the church, and within days, elderly residents were stopping by with their own stories of Nathaniel and Abigail. An old woman named Sylvia brought a pressed flower she'd saved from Abigail's funeral. "She was my daughter's art teacher," Sylvia explained. "Kindest person I ever met. When she died, the whole town mourned. A retired schoolteacher named Roy showed them a carved wooden box Nathaniel had made. He gave these to families who'd lost someone in the war. Never asked for payment. Said grief was burden enough. Each story added depth to the shadows of two people Sam had never met, but was coming to know intimately. Nathaniel, the skilled craftsman who built beauty as a way to process pain. Abigail, the artist who saw potential in everything, even abandoned quarries and forgotten buildings. They'd been real people with real love, and that love had built the bones of this place. Now Sam and Julian were adding flesh to those bones, breathing life back into a dream that had died incomplete. Late one night, Sam found Julian in the library, surrounded by Abigail's sketches and Nathaniel's blueprints. His son was drawing, adding notes to his own pad, comparing old plans to new ideas. "Can't sleep?" Sam asked. "Too much in my head," Julian gestured at the papers. "I keep thinking about them, about how they planned all this together, how it was supposed to be their shared project. And I think about you and Mom, how she helped with your designs, even though woodworking wasn't her thing. She had good instincts. Made everything better." "Yeah," Julian set down his pencil. "I'm glad we're here, Dad. I'm glad we found this place. I know that's weird to say, given how we ended up here, but I needed this. We both did." Sam sat down across from his son. "Your mother used to say that sometimes the worst things lead us to the best things. Not because the bad stuff was good, but because we learned to see differently after." "You think she'd approve of us being here doing this?" "I think she'd say we're exactly where we need to be." Sam pulled out Lydia's compass, set it on the table between them. "The brass caught the lamplight, and I think she'd be proud of you. Of who you're becoming." Julian's eyes shone, but he didn't look away. "I'm proud of you too, for not giving up, for trying again." They sat together in the library as the night deepened, surrounded by the ghosts of other builders, other dreamers. Outside, winter was settling in hard, but inside, something warm was taking root. The estate was coming back to life, one careful repair at a time. And so were they. 5 months into the restoration, spring arrived with a softness that felt like forgiveness. The snow melted, revealing grounds that were more wilderness than garden. But underneath the chaos, Sam could see the structure of Nathaniel's original landscaping. Stone pathways, the bones of flower beds, a fountain that might work again with some effort. Julian had started teaching himself photography, documenting every stage of their work. He'd set up a simple darkroom in one of the smaller outbuildings, developing black and white prints that he hung on a clothesline to dry. The images were striking, close-ups of hand-carved details, wide shots showing the estate's transformation, portraits of townspeople who'd started helping with the work. Because help had come, slowly but steadily. Andre showed up every Saturday now, bringing his friend Lester, another retired contractor. Howard donated materials at cost, sometimes less. Reverend Augustus Frome organized a Sunday work party that drew 15 volunteers. They cleared brush, hauled debris, sanded floors until their arms ached. The estate was becoming more than Sam and Julian's project. It was becoming the town's. Bonnie arrived one morning with a young woman in tow. "Sam, Julian, this is my granddaughter Kayla. She's an artist, just graduated from art school. Thought she might be interested in what you're doing here." Kayla was 22, with paint-stained hands and an eager smile. She walked through the estate with reverence, stopping to photograph details with her phone, running her fingers along the restored woodwork. "This is incredible," she breathed, standing in the library. "The way you've preserved the original character while making it structurally sound. It's exactly what good restoration should be." Julian, who'd been hanging back awkwardly, stepped forward. "You work in restoration?" "I want to. That's my focus. Architectural preservation, historical buildings." There's not much opportunity for it around here, though. Most people just tear things down. She turned to him, eyes bright. But this is special. Would you mind if I documented it? For my portfolio? We're already documenting, Julian said, then caught himself. I mean, I've been taking some photos, but I'm not a professional or anything. Can I see? Sam watched his son lead Kayla to the makeshift darkroom, noting the way Julian's posture changed. More confident, more animated. It had been a long time since he'd seen his son interested in anything beyond survival and obligation. Bonnie caught his eye and smiled knowingly. Young people, she said. They find each other. She seems nice. She is. Lost her father when she was young. Understands grief. Bonnie poured coffee from her thermos. That's what this place is becoming, you know. A gathering point for people who understand loss. People who need to build something meaningful. Sam thought about that as he worked through the day. Every person who'd shown up to help had their own story. Andre's son had died in a fishing accident 10 years ago. Lester's wife had passed from cancer. Reverend Frome's daughter had moved away and rarely called. Even Howard, gruff and practical, had buried a granddaughter who'd never made it to her first birthday. They were all building for different reasons, but the reasons all touched the same wound. The ballroom became their next major focus. It was the largest space in the estate and the most ambitious. Nathaniel had framed it, but never added walls, floor, or ceiling. 60 years of weather had warped some of the lumber, but the fundamental structure was sound. We need to decide something, Julian said, standing in the open space with blueprints in hand. Do we follow Nathaniel's exact plans, or do we adapt for modern use? What would modern use mean? Better insulation, updated electrical, maybe climate control. Make it actually functional for gatherings. Julian pointed to various sections. We could do it without compromising the aesthetic. Nathaniel was brilliant, but he was designing for 1961. We're building for now. Sam walked the perimeter, considering. Through the open framing, he could see the gardens beginning to green up, could hear birds returning after winter. Nathaniel had designed this room to face east, just as Abigail wanted. Morning light streaming through tall windows, making everything look possible. We honor his vision but make it work, Sam decided. Abigail wrote that she wanted this to be a place for celebration. Can't celebrate if everyone's freezing in winter. They drafted plans that evening, Julian's training finally getting full use. He calculated load requirements, designed concealed climate systems, figured out how to run electrical without compromising the room's historic character. Watching him work, Sam felt a surge of pride. His son had found his calling, even if it had taken a circuitous route to get there. Kayla started spending more time at the estate. She'd arrive in the morning with her camera and sketchbook, documenting everything. But she also helped. Stripping paint, cleaning windows, sanding floors. She and Julian developed an easy rapport, working side by side, talking about art and architecture and the intersection between them. You should apply to programs, Sam overheard Kayla telling Julian one afternoon. With your practical experience here, with this portfolio, schools would fight over you. I'm 27, too old to be a student again. That's ridiculous. My professor went back for his master's at 40. Age doesn't matter when you're passionate about something. Sam moved away before they noticed him listening. He was glad Julian had someone encouraging him, someone his own age who understood creative work. Lydia would have liked Kayla. She had that same quality Lydia had possessed, the ability to see potential in people and reflect it back to them until they could see it themselves. The discovery came during the ballroom floor installation. They were laying oak planks, following the grain pattern Nathaniel had specified, when Julian's crowbar hit something solid. Not a joist, something else. They cleared the subflooring carefully and found a metal box, sealed with wax and wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were more journals, but also something unexpected, a collection of glass pieces, hand-cut and wrapped individually. And drawings, dozens of detailed drawings showing a stained glass window design. It's a tree, Kayla said, arranging the drawings in sequence. 2 trees, actually. Growing together, roots intertwined. The design was breathtaking. Two trees rising from connected roots, their branches reaching upward and outward, leaves rendered in different shades of green and gold. Where the branches met, they intertwined, creating a canopy of shared space. Nathaniel's journal explained, Abigail designed this window for the east wall of the ballroom. She said it represented us, two separate people who grew stronger together. I've cut the glass pieces but cannot bring myself to assemble it. Perhaps I never will. The design is hers. Without her, it feels presumptuous to complete it. We should finish it, Kayla said immediately. This design, it's extraordinary. Do you know how rare it is to find original plans with the actual cut glass still preserved? Do you know how to work with stained glass? Sam asked. I took a class in college, but there's a woman in Millerton about an hour from here who's a master glass artist. She might be willing to help, especially with a project like this. The glass artist's name was Miriam Tesla, and she arrived the following week with 60 years of experience and an eye that missed nothing. She examined Abigail's designs with reverence, held the cut glass pieces up to the light, tested their quality. This is museum-quality work, she pronounced. Whoever cut these knew exactly what they were doing. The color gradation, the thickness variation, it's all deliberate, all precise. She looked at Sam. You understand what you have here. This isn't just a window. It's a work of art that was never completed. Finishing it would be... She paused, searching for words. It would be an honor. Miriam agreed to assemble the window, to teach Kayla the process, to ensure Abigail's vision finally became reality. The work would take weeks, maybe months, but that was fine. They'd waited 60 years. A few more months wouldn't matter. Word spread about the window project. The local paper sent a reporter who wrote a feature story. Regional news picked it up. Suddenly people were talking about the Fairmont estate, about the love story behind it, about the father and son restoring it piece by piece. Not all the attention was welcome. A councilman named Dwight Chambers started making noise about the property. He showed up unannounced one afternoon, dressed too well for a construction site, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit. Mr. Ridley, Chambers said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm hearing a lot about your project here. Very ambitious. Very expensive, I'd imagine. We're managing, Sam said carefully. I'm sure you are. But I wanted to make you aware there's been interest in this property. Serious interest. Developers looking to create something that would really benefit the town. Jobs, tax revenue, commercial opportunities. Chambers gestured expansively. What you're doing is admirable, but let's be realistic. Can you actually finish this? Can you maintain it long term? We're not selling, Julian said flatly. You don't own it to sell. You have tenancy rights, contingent on restoration. But what defines restored? That's something the town council decides. Chambers' smile sharpened. Just something to keep in mind. We want what's best for Riverside Bend. Sometimes sentiment has to give way to practicality. After they left, Sam sat down heavily on a pile of lumber. He'd known this was coming, had felt it building. The town had been too supportive, too generous. There had to be another side to the story. He's going to try to take this away from us, Julian said, pacing. That's what this was. A threat. Maybe. Not maybe, definitely. Julian kicked at a loose board. After everything we've put into this place, everything the community has invested, they'd really tear it down for a strip mall or whatever? Sam thought about Nathaniel, about how he'd poured his heart into this building only to abandon it when the pain became too much. How the estate had sat empty for 60 years, slowly dying, because no one had the will or the resources to save it. They won't take it, Sam said with more confidence than he felt. We just have to finish. Make it undeniable. Show them what this place can become. But that night, alone in the room he'd made his own, Sam wondered if confidence was enough. They had months of work left, maybe years. Chambers had money, political connections, developers whispering in his ear. What did Sam have? An old dog, a determined son, and a town full of people who helped when they could but had their own struggles to manage. He pulled out Lydia's compass, but for once it offered no comfort. The needle spun uncertainly, searching for true north in a field too disturbed to read clearly. Sometimes, Sam thought, you couldn't find direction. You just had to pick a path and commit to it, even when you couldn't see where it led. He chose to believe they'd finish what Nathaniel started. The alternative was unthinkable. 6 months into the project, the estate had transformed enough that people driving past would slow down to look. The exterior was nearly complete. Roof solid, windows gleaming, stonework repaired and repointed. The grounds were still wild, but intentionally so now, with pathways cleared and the fountain restored to working order. Inside, room by room was coming back to life. The library was finished, its hidden compartments now part of guided tours that Bonnie had started offering on Saturday afternoons. The entrance hall gleamed with restored woodwork. The kitchen, though still needing appliances, had good bones and better plumbing than it had seen in decades. Sam had started teaching woodworking classes in the carriage house every Tuesday and Thursday evening. It began with just Howard and Andre, 2 old men wanting to keep their hands busy. But word spread. A young veteran named Curtis started coming, saying the work helped quiet his mind. A recently divorced woman named Stella showed up with her teenage daughter, both of them needing something to build together. A retired librarian named Vernon arrived with a curiosity about traditional joinery techniques. Sam taught them the way his own father had taught him, patiently, encouraging mistakes as learning opportunities, emphasizing that good work took time. He used Nathaniel's tools, which somehow made the lessons feel more substantial. These implements had built beautiful things once. They could do so again. Measure twice, cut once, Sam would say, echoing the motto inscribed on Nathaniel's tape measure. The wood will forgive patience. It won't forgive haste. Curtis proved especially talented. His hands were steady, his focus intense. After class one evening he lingered, running his hand along the workbench. I did 3 tours, he said quietly. Came back and couldn't figure out what to do with myself. Couldn't hold a regular job. Too much noise in my head, you know? He looked at Sam. But this, working with my hands, creating something, it's the first time I've felt calm in 2 years. Sam understood that better than Curtis probably realized. After Lydia died, the noise in his own head had been deafening. Work was the only thing that quieted it, and even then, only temporarily. Nathaniel felt the same way, Sam said. That's what these tools represent. A man trying to build his way through grief. Did it work? I don't know. He never finished. Sam picked up one of Nathaniel's handplanes, felt its weight. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the work itself is what matters, not whether it fixes everything. Curtis nodded slowly. Howard mentioned you might need help with the ballroom. I've got construction experience. If you need another set of hands, we do, Sam said. Absolutely we do. The ballroom was consuming most of their energy now. The framing was complete, walls were going up, and the floor was 3/4 finished. Miriam and Kayla worked in a corner they'd partitioned off, assembling Abigail's stained glass window piece by painstaking piece. The design was even more beautiful in reality than in drawings. The intertwined trees seemed to glow with inner light. Julian spent hours photographing the window's construction, documenting each stage. He and Kayla had grown close, though neither seemed willing to acknowledge what was obvious to everyone else. They worked well together, finished each other's sentences, found excuses to collaborate on projects. You should tell her, Sam said one afternoon when they were alone. Tell her what? That you care about her. Julian's face reddened. We're just friends. Colleagues, really. She's helping with documentation. Son, I may be old, but I'm not blind. You light up when she walks in. You've started actually combing your hair in the morning. And unless I'm very mistaken, she feels the same way. Even if that were true, which I'm not saying it is, what would be the point? We're not staying here permanently. Once the estate is finished, who says we're not staying? Julian blinked. We never talked about that. I just assumed. You assumed we'd finish and leave. Go where exactly? Sam set down his hammer. I've been thinking. If this place becomes what I think it can become, it'll need someone to run it, to maintain it, to teach those classes and organize events. That could be a job, a life even. You want to stay in Riverside Bend. I want to be where the work is, Sam said. And the work is here. But that's me. You've got your whole future ahead of you. If you want to go back to school, pursue architecture somewhere else, I'd understand. Julian looked around the ballroom, at the work they'd done, the community they'd built. I don't know what I want yet, he admitted. But I know I'm not ready to leave. That evening, the town council called a public meeting about the estate. Sam had been expecting it. Chambers had been too quiet lately, which meant he was planning something. The meeting was held in the community center, a converted warehouse with folding chairs and fluorescent lights that hummed. Chambers stood at the front, a presentation queued up on a laptop. Let's be clear about what we're discussing, he began. The Fairmont estate is town property. Mr. Ridley has tenancy rights, yes, but those rights are conditional. The question before us is simple. Does this restoration serve the town's best interests? He clicked through slides showing financial projections, tax implications, employment statistics. A development company called Riverside Ventures wanted to buy the land. They'd build a commercial complex, retail spaces, offices, maybe a small hotel. Jobs for locals, revenue for the town. Progress, Chambers emphasized repeatedly. Progress. Now I admire what Mr. Ridley has accomplished, Chambers continued, his tone patronizing. It's a nice hobby project. But hobbies don't pay bills. Sentiment doesn't fund schools. We need to think practically about Riverside Bend's future. Sam stood when Chambers finished. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. You're right that sentiment doesn't pay bills. But this estate isn't sentiment. It's history. It's craftsmanship. It's a reminder that we used to build things that mattered, and things that lasted. He gestured to the people gathered. Howard, Andre, Doreen, Reverend Frome, Bonnie, and dozens of others who'd helped with the restoration. This project has brought people together. It's given folks a reason to care about this town again. You want to talk about economic impact? Talk to Howard about increased hardware sales. Talk to Doreen about her diner's busiest months in years. Talk to the Historical Society about tourism potential. Potential isn't profit, Chambers shot back. Dreams don't balance budgets. Neither do strip malls, if all they do is siphon money out of town to corporate headquarters somewhere else. Julian stood beside his father. We've documented everything we've done. The techniques, the materials, the authentic restoration methods. Architectural schools are interested. Historical preservation organizations are interested. This estate could become an educational center, a destination. That's sustainable revenue, not just a one-time development fee. The council members exchanged glances. The chairwoman, a pragmatic woman named Beverly Frost, leaned forward. Mr. Ridley, be honest with us. Can you actually finish this project? We've seen remarkable progress, but there's still significant work remaining. The ballroom alone will be completed in 3 months, Sam said. We have volunteers committed, materials secured, and detailed plans. More importantly, we have community support. People believe in this project. Some people believe in it, Chambers interjected. Others believe in paychecks and economic growth. Reverend Frome stood. I'd like to speak, if I may. He waited for nods from the council. I've watched this town decline for 20 years. Watched young families leave because there was no future here. Watched buildings empty and businesses close. And I've prayed for something, anything that might reverse that trend. He gestured toward Sam. Then this man arrived with nothing but determination and a 50-cent property deed. And slowly, something shifted. People started gathering again. Started working together. Started believing we could be more than a dying town on a forgotten road. His voice strengthened. The estate isn't just a building. It's proof that renewal is possible. That broken things can be restored. That's worth more than any development deal. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone. Some faces remained skeptical, others worried about jobs and money. But enough. People clapped. The Chamber's expression tightened with barely concealed anger. Beverly Frost called for order. The council will take all input under advisement. We'll vote at next month's meeting. That gives us time to review proposals from both parties. Mr. Ridley, you'll need to present a detailed completion timeline and sustainability plan. Riverside Ventures, You'll need to address community concerns about local employment and economic distribution. Meeting adjourned. Walking back to the estate that night, Sam felt the weight of what they'd taken on. 3 months to finish the ballroom. 3 months to prove this wasn't just a dream, but a viable plan. 3 months to secure the estate's future before Chambers could tear it down for parking lots and chain stores. "We can do it," Julian said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as his father. "With Curtis helping and all the volunteers, we'll do it," Sam agreed. "We don't have a choice." But later, lying awake in his room, Sam wondered if determination was enough. They'd come so far, rebuilt so much. The estate was beautiful again, functional again. But beautiful and functional didn't guarantee survival. Not when money and politics entered the equation. He thought about Nathaniel, how he'd created something extraordinary and then walked away because he couldn't face finishing it alone. Sam wouldn't make that mistake. He had Julian, had the community, had a reason to keep building. He pulled out Lydia's compass one more time. The needle pointed steady north, unwavering despite his doubts. True north. He'd follow that bearing wherever it led. Even if it led straight into a fight, he wasn't sure he could win. 1 week before the council vote, Julian was photographing the completed sections of the ballroom for their presentation. The room was nearly finished now. Walls up, floor complete, the ceiling's intricate coffered design taking shape. Only the stained glass window remained to be installed, and Miriam had promised it would be ready in time. Julian was adjusting his camera angle when Ranger started barking. Not his usual alert bark, but something more insistent. The dog was pawing at the wall near the main entrance, the same obsessive behavior he'd shown at the cellar months ago. "What have you got, boy?" Sam asked, walking over. The wall looked solid, recently plastered and painted, but Ranger wouldn't stop, kept scratching at a point about 3 feet up. Sam ran his hand along the surface, feeling for there. A slight irregularity, a seam barely visible under the fresh paint. "Julian, bring your light." With better illumination, they could see it, the outline of a small door, perhaps 2 feet square, painted over and blended into the wall so carefully they'd missed it during restoration. Sam carefully cut away the paint and plaster, revealing a wooden panel with a small keyhole. "There's no key for this in any of the journals," Julian said, flipping through Nathaniel's notes on his phone. No mention of a hidden panel in the ballroom. Sam thought back to the portrait of Nathaniel they'd found in the main hall, the one they'd restored and hung according to the journal's instructions. Behind that portrait had been a key and a letter. Could there be another? They returned to the entrance hall. The portrait showed Nathaniel in his 30s, serious-faced, holding a set of carpenter's tools. Sam lifted it carefully off the wall. Nothing behind it, they'd already checked. But what about the frame itself? Julian examined it closely, running his fingers along the edges. Wait, the backing board feels thicker than it should. He carefully pried it loose, and something fell out, an ornate skeleton key on a ribbon and a sealed envelope. The envelope was addressed in Nathaniel's precise handwriting. "To whoever finishes what I could not." Sam's hand shook as he opened it. The letter inside was dated September 1963, the same as Nathaniel's final journal entry. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then you've restored more than I ever could. You've brought life back to these walls. For that, I'm grateful in ways I cannot adequately express. I need to tell you the truth about this estate. When I began building, I told everyone it was to be a home for Abigail and myself. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Abigail and I had a larger vision, one we shared but never spoke of publicly. We both lost family to war. My younger brother died in the Pacific. Abigail's first love was killed in Korea before we found each other again. These losses shaped us, taught us that grief needs purpose or it consumes everything. We planned to make this estate a healing center for veterans, a place where men and women who'd served could find peace, learn new skills, rebuild their lives. The workshop spaces, the communal areas, the gardens, all designed with that purpose in mind. The ballroom was meant to be a celebration space where people who'd survived darkness could remember how to feel joy. After Abigail died, I couldn't face it. How could I help others heal when I was drowning in my own grief? How could I finish a healing center when I was broken beyond repair? I tried, God knows I tried. But every room I built felt like a lie. Every board I placed mocked me. So I stopped. I sealed away the plans, the truth, everything, and I left. The key you found opens a room I never told anyone about, not even in my journals. Inside, you'll find the complete vision Abigail and I shared. The full blueprints, the fundraising documents, the letters from veterans organizations we'd contacted. Everything we meant this place to be. There's also a legal document, a trust I established before I left. If this estate is ever restored to its original purpose, it cannot be sold commercially. The land and buildings transfer to a community trust, protected in perpetuity. I couldn't finish our dream, but I made sure no one could destroy it for profit. You've already rebuilt so much. I hope you'll consider finishing what we truly intended. This town needs healing. This country needs spaces where broken people can become whole again. If you're the person I believe you are, someone who understands loss and the need for purpose, you'll understand why this matters. Build it and they will heal. As you have healed in the building. Sam had to sit down. Julian reread the letter over his shoulder, neither of them speaking for a long moment. He planned this as a veterans center, Julian finally said. The whole time. That's why the layout never quite made sense as a private residence. All these communal spaces, the multiple workshops, it was never meant to be a home. It was meant to be a sanctuary. Sam looked at the key in his hand, and there's a trust, legal protection. They practically ran to the ballroom, Ranger bounding ahead. The key fit perfectly in the hidden panel. The small door swung open, revealing a space lined with metal filing boxes, protected from moisture and time. Inside the boxes were treasures that rewrote everything they thought they knew. Complete architectural plans showing not just the main estate, but additional buildings never constructed. A separate workshop complex, therapeutic gardens with specific plantings, even a small chapel. Fundraising documents from 1960 showing significant pledges from veterans organizations. Letters from former soldiers expressing desperate need for exactly what Nathaniel proposed. And the trust documents. Sam read them carefully, his heart pounding. The language was clear. If the property was restored and dedicated to community healing and veteran services, ownership would transfer from the Fairmont Family Trust to a community board. The estate could never be sold for commercial development. It would be protected permanently. Chambers doesn't know about this, Julian said, reading over his father's shoulder. No one does. That's why the council was able to offer it for 50 cents. They thought it was just abandoned property with complicated family claims. But it's not. Nathaniel set this up specifically to prevent what Chambers is trying to do. Sam felt something shift in his chest, hope mixing with responsibility. We haven't just been restoring a building. We've been fulfilling a mission we didn't even know existed. They found more in the boxes. Photographs of Nathaniel and Abigail meeting with veterans, planning sessions, site visits to other healing centers they'd studied. A journal in Abigail's hand describing their philosophy. Trauma needs witnesses. Healing needs community. We'll create a space where both are possible. There were financial records, too, evidence that Nathaniel had invested significantly in a trust fund meant to support the center's operations. Decades of growth had made it substantial. More than enough to sustain programming, maintenance, staff. Everything's here, Julian said, almost in awe. The complete vision, the funding, the legal protection, all of it just waiting for someone to finish it, Sam completed. That's what we've been doing all along without knowing it. Bonnie arrived an hour later, summoned by an urgent call. When they showed her the documents, her face went pale. I knew, she said quietly. Or part of it. I knew Abigail wanted to help veterans. She talked about it before she died. But I didn't know about the trust, about the legal protections. She looked at Sam with something like wonder. Do you understand what this means? You can't lose the estate. If you complete the restoration and establish it as a community center with veteran services, the transfer is automatic. Chambers has no legal ground to sell to developers, but we have to finish first, Julian said. and prove we're meeting the Trust's requirements. Which are? Sam asked. Bonnie read through the documents. Restoration to original structural standards. You've done that. Establishment of community programming focused on healing and skill building. Your workshops qualify. And dedication of space for veteran services. She looked up. You'd need to partner with veterans organizations, offer specific programming for them. Sam thought of Curtis, how woodworking had given him peace after 3 tours in combat. How working with his hands had quieted the noise in his head. I know exactly who to call. Over the next 3 days, they contacted every veterans organization within 200 miles. The response was overwhelming. Program directors visited, saw the space, understood immediately what it could become. Pledges of support poured in, funding for programming, volunteer counselors, skills trainers. One director, a woman named Patricia, broke down crying in the ballroom. "Do you know how many veterans I've watched struggle after coming home?" she said. "How many I've lost to suicide, addiction, hopelessness. A space like this, dedicated to healing, with actual community investment, it could save lives. It will save lives." They organized everything for the council presentation. The trust documents proving legal protection, letters of support from veterans organizations, commitment pledges for programming and funding, testimonials from Curtis and other veterans about the impact of Sam's workshops, photographs showing the estate's transformation, financial projections proving sustainability. "This changes everything," Julian said the night before the vote. "We're not just asking the council to let us keep restoring. We're showing them the estate already has a legally protected purpose. Chambers' development deal is dead before it starts." Sam wasn't quite as confident. "Legal documents only matter if people honor them. Chambers has connections, money, influence. He'll fight this. Let him fight. We have the truth on our side." Sam pulled out Lydia's compass, checking its bearing one more time. The needle pointed steady north, unwavering. He thought about Nathaniel and Abigail, how they'd planned all this 60 years ago, how they'd built in protections that would survive decades of neglect and bureaucratic confusion. 2 people in love, dreaming of helping others heal. They'd never gotten to see their vision realized. But maybe, just maybe, Sam and Julian could finish what they'd started. Not just a building, a mission, a purpose. A place where broken people could find their way back to wholeness. "Tomorrow," Sam said, "we show them what this place was always meant to be." Julian nodded. "Tomorrow we win." Sam hoped his son was right. But he'd learned that hope and certainty weren't the same thing. And the only certainty was that they'd given this everything they had. The rest was up to the council, the community, and whatever grace the universe might offer to people trying to honor old dreams with new hands. The morning of the community event arrived with crystalline spring sunshine. Sam woke before dawn, unable to sleep, and found Julian already in the ballroom making final adjustments to the display boards. The stained glass window had been installed 2 days earlier, and morning light was just beginning to catch its colors, sending patterns of green and gold across the floor. "It's beautiful," Sam said, standing beside his son. Abigail knew what she was doing. Morning light is kindest. Julian adjusted a panel showing the estate's transformation, before and after photographs that documented 6 months of relentless work. "Do you think it'll be enough?" "It has to be." They'd invited the entire town, plus representatives from veterans organizations, the Historical Society, and the press. The ballroom could hold perhaps 200 people comfortably. Sam had no idea how many would actually come. By noon he had his answer. Cars lined the access road for a quarter-mile. People streamed through the gates, elderly residents who remembered Nathaniel, young families curious about the renovation, veterans in uniform and civilian clothes, journalists with cameras and notepads. The ballroom filled quickly, forcing them to open adjacent rooms and set up speakers so everyone could hear. Kayla had created a documentary that played on a loop, 15 minutes of footage showing the estate's transformation from ruin to restoration. The images were powerful. Sam barely recognized the broken man who'd arrived 7 months ago with nothing but a duffel bag and desperate hope. The community quilt hung on one wall, a surprise Doreen had organized without telling them. Dozens of fabric squares, each one created by a different person, each telling a story of connection to the estate or to the work of restoration. Howard's square showed the tools of his trade. Curtis had contributed fabric painted with the words, "Peace through Purpose." At 2 o'clock, Reverend Frome called everyone to attention. "We're gathered here to celebrate more than a restoration," he began. "We're celebrating renewal. Of a building, yes, but more importantly, of community." He invited Beverly Frost, the council chairwoman, to speak. She looked uncomfortable, caught between community sentiment and political pressure. "The council recognizes the significant work accomplished here," she said carefully. "We've received the documentation Mr. Ridley submitted, including the trust provisions discovered recently. These documents will be reviewed thoroughly before tonight's vote." Sam caught the slight emphasis on reviewed. Chambers had gotten to her, planted doubt about the document's legitimacy. The Historical Society representative presented next, describing the estate's architectural significance and educational value. Patricia from the Veterans Organization spoke about need, about suicide rates, about places dedicated to healing. Curtis stood reluctantly and talked about finding peace through working with his hands. The testimonials continued. Each one built the case that this place mattered, that it served a purpose beyond nostalgia or sentiment. Then Bonnie stood and the room quieted. "I was young when Abigail died," she began. "Only 19. But I remember her clearly. She believed that nothing was beyond redemption." She revealed the trust documents then, explaining their provisions in clear terms. The estate couldn't be sold commercially if restored to its intended purpose. It was legally protected, designed to serve the community in perpetuity. The room erupted in applause. Sam saw Chambers in the back, his face rigid with barely controlled anger. But Chambers stood, raising his voice over the applause. "This is all very moving, very sentimental. But sentiment doesn't address the fundamental question: can this center actually sustain itself? Pledges aren't budgets. What happens in 5 years when the novelty wears off?" Beverly Frost nodded. "That's a fair question, Mr. Ridley. The trust documents indicate there's an endowment, but we'll need verification." Sam presented the financial projections, the trust's substantial endowment, revenue from programs and rentals, sustainability plans. The numbers were solid, undeniable. "The money isn't the issue," Sam concluded. "All that's left is the decision. Do we honor this vision or tear it down for short-term profit?" Chambers tried to interrupt, but Beverly held up her hand. "There's one more matter. We received an anonymous complaint yesterday about building code violations. An inspector is scheduled to visit tomorrow morning before tonight's vote." Sam's stomach dropped. An anonymous complaint meant Chambers, searching for any technicality to block them. "We followed all codes strictly," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nevertheless, the inspection must be conducted before the vote." As people mingled after the presentations, Sam felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. They'd worked so hard, come so far. Could it really come down to some inspector finding a technicality? Howard found him standing alone near the stained glass window. "Inspector coming tomorrow is Alvin Burke. I know him. Decent man, not easily pressured. He'll be fair. Fair might not be enough if Chambers has gotten to him, then we trust the work. You've built this place right, Sam. That shows." As afternoon faded, people began leaving for the council meeting. Sam and Julian stayed behind, walking through the ballroom one last time. "Whatever happens," Julian said, "we did something amazing here. That matters, regardless of what the council decides." Sam touched the stained glass window, felt the cool surface under his palm. Two trees growing together, stronger together than apart. "Let's go," he said. "Time to find out if faith and hard work are enough." They walked to town, under a sky turning purple with dusk. The council chambers were packed. Sam and Julian pushed through to seats Bonnie had saved near the front. Chambers sat with his developer contacts, confident and smiling. He thought he'd won. Beverly Frost called the meeting to order. "We have one item on tonight's agenda: the future of the Fairmont estate. Before we vote, are there any final statements?" Chambers stood, Just a reminder that pending tomorrow's inspection results, we should table this vote. Rushing forward could expose the town to liability. We could table it, Beverly agreed. Or we could trust that 7 months of properly permitted work will pass inspection. I've reviewed every permit, every inspection report, every certification. It's all in order, she looked at Chambers. Unless you have specific evidence of violations, actual evidence, not anonymous complaints, I see no reason to delay. Chambers' smile faltered. The council will now vote, Beverly announced, on the question of whether to approve the Fairmont Estates transfer to community trust status. All in favor? Sam held his breath. 5 hands rose. Then 6, then 7. All opposed? Only 2 hands, Chambers and 1 ally. Motion carries. The estate transfers to community trust protection effective immediately. The room exploded in applause and cheers. Julian grabbed Sam in a fierce hug. People surged forward, congratulating them, celebrating. Sam stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed. They'd done it. The estate was safe. But even as celebration surrounded him, Sam knew this was only the beginning. The real work, sustaining what they'd built, proving it could serve its purpose long-term, that work started tomorrow. The celebration spilled out of the council chambers and into the street. Someone produced bottles of champagne. Doreen announced free pie for everyone at the diner. Strangers hugged Sam like he was family, which in a way he supposed he was now. But as the crowd thinned and people drifted toward the diner or home, Sam felt something shift inside him. Not relief exactly, something deeper. He'd been running on adrenaline and determination for 7 months, pushing through exhaustion and doubt, building as fast as he could to outrun the grief that had nearly consumed him. Now suddenly, there was nowhere left to run. The vote was done. The estate was protected. And Sam had to face what came next, actually living in the space he'd created, becoming part of a community instead of just saving a building. "Dad!" Julian's voice cut through his thoughts. "You okay?" "I need a minute," Sam said. "I'll meet you at the diner." He walked instead toward the estate, needing to see it in the darkness, to stand in front of it alone. The building rose against the night sky, windows glowing warm, solid, real. His responsibility now in ways that went beyond hammers and nails. Ranger met him at the gates, tail wagging. The dog had been with him through everything. The collapse after Lydia's death, the long slide into despair, the desperate journey to this forgotten town. "Good boy," Sam said, kneeling to scratch behind Ranger's ears. "We did it. Now comes the hard part, keeping it going." He walked through the grounds, past the restored fountain, through gardens that were starting to bloom. Everything he touched was still here, still solid, but maintaining it, programming it, making it serve its purpose day after day, that required different skills than restoration. The ballroom drew him like gravity. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, not bothering with lights. Moonlight through the stained glass window cast colored shadows across the floor. The intertwined trees seemed to move in the shifting light. Sam stood in the center of the room and let himself acknowledge the fear he'd been suppressing. What if Chambers was right? What if enthusiasm faded? What if he couldn't sustain what they'd built? What if the weight of daily operation crushed what love had created? He pulled out Lydia's compass, checking its bearing in the moonlight. The needle pointed steady north. "I don't know how to do this next part," he admitted aloud, speaking to Lydia, to Nathaniel, to whoever might be listening. "I know how to build things. I don't know how to run a community center. I don't know how to manage programs and volunteers and budgets. What if I fail? What if I let everyone down?" The compass needle didn't waver. True north, steady and sure. Maybe that was the answer. He didn't have to know everything. He just had to stay true to the purpose, providing space for healing, for learning, for community. The details could be figured out with help from people who knew more than he did. That was the lesson Nathaniel had never learned. You couldn't do it alone. The moment you tried to carry everything yourself, the weight became unbearable. Sam heard footsteps behind him. Julian entered, followed by Kayla and Bonnie. They'd come looking for him, unwilling to let him spiral into doubt alone. "We know what you're thinking," Bonnie said without preamble. You're wondering if you can actually do this. Run this place day to day. Sam nodded, not trusting his voice. Good, she continued. Self-doubt means you're taking it seriously. But you're not doing it alone. We've already got volunteers committed to regular schedules. Patricia's Veterans Organization will handle their programming. Kayla's coordinating arts classes. Julian's managing architectural documentation and consulting. Howard and Andre are teaching alongside you. And I found someone, Julian added. A professional director with community center experience. Her name's Gail Preston. She wants to meet with you next week. Bonnie thinks the trust can afford to hire her within 2 months. You did all this already? Sam asked. We did it together, Kayla said gently. That's the whole point. You saved this building, but we're all responsible for what it becomes now. Sam felt the tightness in his chest ease slightly. They understood. They'd anticipated his fears and were already building support structures around them. There's something else, Bonnie said. The inspection tomorrow. Alvin Burke called me. Chambers tried to pressure him, implied there'd be consequences if he didn't find violations. But Alvin's been in this business 30 years. He doesn't appreciate being manipulated, so he'll be fair. He'll be thorough. If there are problems, he'll document them honestly. But he won't manufacture issues to satisfy political pressure. Bonnie smiled slightly. And between us, he's been following the restoration. Admires the quality of work. I think he's on our side. They stayed with Sam in the ballroom for an hour, talking through logistics and plans, transforming abstract fears into concrete action items. By the time they left, Sam felt steadier, not fearless, but no longer paralyzed by doubt. He remained alone for a while longer, saying goodbye to this phase of the work. The restoration was complete. Now came operation, maintenance, programming, different challenges requiring different strengths. Before leaving, Sam walked to the carved cornerstone, touching the stone where Nathaniel's and Abigail's initials were inscribed. Soon his own name would be added to the memorial plaque. The thought both honored and terrified him. I'll do my best, he promised. We'll do our best. That's all anyone can ask. Walking back through the darkness, Ranger beside him, Sam felt ready for tomorrow. The inspector would come. They'd pass, or they wouldn't. Either way, the community had made its choice. The estate was protected by law and by collective commitment. The hard work of making it live up to its purpose, that work was just beginning. But Sam wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. 3 months after the council vote, the estate buzzed with constant activity. Sam arrived at the workshop early one September morning to find Curtis already there, arranging tools for the day's veterans therapy session. The young man had transformed over the summer, steadier, more confident, finally finding his footing after years of struggling. Morning, Curtis said, looking up from his work. Patricia's bringing 6 new participants today. Figured we should have extra bench space ready. Sam nodded, moving to help set up additional workstations. The woodworking therapy program had launched in July, and the demand had exceeded everyone's expectations. Veterans were driving from 3 counties away to participate, finding in the rhythmic work of hand tools something that medication and traditional therapy hadn't provided, a way to quiet the noise in their heads. Julian appeared in the doorway, camera in hand as usual. He'd been documenting everything for his thesis, building a portfolio that was attracting serious attention from preservation organizations. Dad, the Historical Society called. They want to send a film crew next month. Something about a documentary on rural restoration projects. Tell them yes, Sam said. The more people who understand what's possible, the better. The estate had become something of a model. Other small towns were reaching out, asking how Riverside Bend had managed such a comprehensive restoration with limited resources. Julian fielded most of those inquiries, explaining the combination of volunteer labor, community investment, and the trust fund that made long-term sustainability possible. But success brought complications. The programs were growing faster than they could manage. The waiting lists kept expanding. They needed more instructors, more space, more coordination. Sam found himself spending less time building and more time administrating, which frustrated him. He was a carpenter, not a manager. Bonnie had sensed his tension. She'd shown up last week with a proposal: hire a full-time director to handle operations, letting Sam focus on teaching and program development. The trust could afford it, she'd argued. They needed professional management if they were going to scale effectively. Sam had resisted at first. This was his project, his responsibility. But watching Curtis prepare for the therapy session, seeing how the young veteran had grown into a leadership role, Sam realized he needed to follow his own lessons about letting others help carry the load. The morning session went well. 6 veterans, ranging from their 20s to their 50s, gathered around workbenches with varying degrees of nervousness. Patricia introduced each one, sharing just enough of their stories to create context without violating privacy. Combat trauma, adjustment difficulties, struggles with purpose after service. Familiar patterns Sam had seen repeatedly. He started them simple, learning to sharpen chisels, understanding grain direction, practicing basic cuts. No pressure, no judgment, just the quiet satisfaction of steel against wood, of creating something tangible. One participant, a woman named Michelle who'd served in logistics, took to it immediately. Her hands were steady, her focus intense. "I used to fix equipment overseas," she said during a break. "Kept our vehicles running in impossible conditions. Came home and couldn't figure out what to do with that skill set. This feels similar. Problem solving with your hands." "That's exactly what it is," Sam agreed. "Every piece of wood is a puzzle. You just have to figure out how it wants to be solved." After the session, Patricia pulled him aside. "We're getting inquiries from military bases about replicating this program. The VA is interested in funding expansion. This could become something much larger than one community center." Sam felt both excitement and apprehension. Larger meant more impact, more veterans helped. But it also meant more complexity, more administration, more distance from the actual work of teaching and building. "Let's talk to Bonnie," he said. "If we're going to expand, we need proper structure. Can't just keep adding programs and hoping everything holds together." That afternoon, Sam walked the grounds with Ranger, checking on the various activities happening simultaneously. Kayla was teaching a painting class in the converted sunroom. Andre led a group of teenagers through basic carpentry in the carriage house. The library hosted a book discussion. The kitchen hummed with a community cooking class. Every room served a purpose. Every space supported healing or learning or connection. But something gnawed at Sam. Chambers' warning from months ago echoed in his mind. What happens when the novelty wears off? When volunteers move on? When enthusiasm fades into routine? He found Julian in his office, reviewing architectural plans for potential expansion. "We need to talk about sustainability," Sam said, settling into a chair. "Real sustainability, not just financial." Julian set down his pencil. "You're worried we're growing too fast. I'm worried we're building on enthusiasm rather than structure. Enthusiasm fades. We need systems that work even when people aren't excited anymore, when it's just daily maintenance and regular programming. That's what hiring a director would address. Professional management, sustainable systems, long-term planning." Julian pulled out a folder. "Bonnie found someone. Name's Gail Preston. Ran a community center in Vermont for 15 years. Has experience with grant writing, volunteer coordination, program development. She's interested." Sam took the folder, flipped through the resume. Impressive credentials, relevant experience, references that praised her ability to build sustainable organizations. Why would she want to come to Riverside Bend? Same reason we stayed. She wants to build something meaningful. Says the estate's mission resonates with her own values about community healing. Julian leaned forward. "Dad, you don't have to do everything yourself. That's what you've been teaching everyone else, that we're stronger together. Maybe it's time to practice what you preach." Sam smiled ruefully. "When did you get so wise?" "Learned from a stubborn carpenter who rebuilt his life one board at a time." Julian's expression grew serious. "You gave me my life back, Dad. Let me help you build something sustainable here. Let other people help too. That's how this place survives, by becoming bigger than any one person." That evening, Sam sat in the ballroom alone, watching sunset light stream through the stained glass window. The intertwined trees glowed within a fire, their branches reaching toward each other across colored glass. Two separate entities, growing stronger together. Maybe that was the lesson he still needed to learn. He'd spent so long being self-sufficient, relying only on himself, that accepting help still felt like weakness. But this place had taught him otherwise. The estate hadn't been restored by one man's effort. It had been saved by a community working together. And if it was going to thrive, really thrive, it needed that same collaborative spirit going forward. Bonnie found him there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Figured you'd be here," she said, sitting beside him. "Big thoughts?" "Thinking about what comes next. How we make this last. You hire Gail, you build proper systems. You trust that other people care about this place as much as you do." Bonnie sipped her coffee. "And you remember that Nathaniel's mistake wasn't lack of skill or vision. It was trying to carry everything alone. Don't make the same error." Sam watched the light shift across the floor, patterns moving as the sun descended. "I'm not good at letting go." "You don't have to let go. Just share the weight. There's a difference." Bonnie stood, patting his shoulder. "Sleep on it. But I think you already know what needs to happen." After she left, Sam remained in the ballroom, thinking about beginnings and continuations. The restoration was complete, but the real work, the daily work of running a community center, of serving people who needed it, was just beginning. That work would require different skills, different energy, different leadership than the physical labor of rebuilding. He pulled out Lydia's compass, studying its familiar weight in his palm. The needle pointed steady north, as always. But true north wasn't a destination, it was a direction. You didn't arrive at north and stop. You kept moving, kept navigating, kept adjusting your course as conditions changed. Maybe it was time to adjust course, to step back from day-to-day management and focus on what he did best: teaching, mentoring, building relationships through shared work. To trust that the structure they'd created was strong enough to support professional leadership. The estate would continue, programs would expand, more people would be served, and Sam would still be part of it, just in a different role. Not the hero who saved the building, but one member of a community that maintained it together. That felt right, sustainable, true to Nathaniel and Abigail's original vision of communal healing. Sam stood, pocketed the compass, and walked toward home. Tomorrow, he'd call Gail Preston, start conversations about structure and systems and sustainable growth. Tonight, he'd rest in the knowledge that they'd built something solid, something that could evolve and adapt and continue serving its purpose long after he was gone. The work wasn't finished, but then the best work never was. It just kept growing, kept changing, kept becoming whatever the community needed it to be. And that was exactly how it should be. The reception in the ballroom was in full swing when Chambers made his appearance. Sam saw him first, standing near the entrance with his arms crossed, surveying the crowd with barely concealed disgust. He'd lost the vote, lost his development deal, but apparently he wasn't ready to concede defeat gracefully. Sam moved toward him, wanting to head off whatever confrontation was brewing. But Bonnie reached Chambers first, her expression neutral but firm. "Dwight," she said coolly. "Didn't expect to see you here. Public event, public building," Chambers replied. "Or so I'm told. Though I wonder how public it'll really be once your little board starts making decisions about who gets access. Everyone gets access. That's the whole point." Bonnie gestured at the diverse crowd, veterans in uniform, families with children, elderly residents, young artists. "This place belongs to the community. It belongs to a trust that you control. There's a difference." Chambers lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent Sam from overhearing. "You realize what you've cost this town? Real jobs, real revenue, real growth, all for sentiment and nostalgia. We chose preservation over profit," Bonnie said. "Some things are worth more than money. Easy to say when you're not struggling to pay bills or watching your kids leave because there's no future here." Chambers shook his head. "You've built a beautiful museum, congratulations, but museums don't feed families." Sam stepped forward before he could stop himself. "This isn't a museum. It's a working community center. Already, we've got 40 people enrolled in various programs, another 60 on waiting lists. We're partnering with 3 veterans organizations. The Historical Society is planning educational programming. Local craftspeople are teaching skills that were almost lost. That's not nostalgia, that's investment in actual people. Chambers turned his cold assessment on Sam. You got lucky. Found some old documents that protected your pet project. But luck runs out. Grants dry up. Volunteers move on. Buildings need constant maintenance, constant funding. Give it 5 years, and you'll be back at a council meeting begging for money to keep this place from falling apart again. Then we'll rebuild it again, Julian said, appearing beside his father. Kayla stood with him, her camera still around her neck from documenting the ceremony. That's what communities do. They maintain what matters, spoken like someone who's never had to make hard choices about limited resources. Chambers glanced around the ballroom one more time, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. I'll admit it's beautiful. Really beautiful. But beauty doesn't pay property taxes or fund school budgets. When reality sets in, don't say I didn't warn you. He left without another word, and the tension in Sam's shoulders eased slightly. But the encounter had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. Because Chambers wasn't entirely wrong. The trust fund provided security, but running a community center required constant work, constant vigilance, constant care. What happened when Sam got older, when his energy flagged? What happened when Julian moved on to other projects? What happened when the novelty wore off and volunteers stopped showing up? Don't let him get in your head, Bonnie said quietly. She'd stayed close, watching the exchange. He's bitter because he lost. But you haven't just built a building, Sam. You've built something that matters to people. That's harder to destroy than he realizes. Patricia, the Veterans Organization director, joined them with Curtis in tow. Everything all right? I saw Chambers leaving. He looked unhappy. He's unhappy we chose community over commerce, Bonnie explained. Well, speaking of community, Curtis has something to share. Patricia nudged the young veteran forward encouragingly. Curtis looked uncomfortable with attention as always, but his voice was steady when he spoke. I've been working with Patricia on something. We want to establish a formal woodworking therapy program here, not just casual classes, but structured therapeutic intervention for veterans dealing with PTSD, trauma, adjustment issues. There's research showing that working with your hands, creating tangible things, helps rewire trauma responses in the brain. We've secured funding, Patricia added. A 3-year grant from a national foundation, enough to hire a full-time therapist who specializes in occupational therapy for veterans, plus materials and program costs. We'd like to base it here, use the workshop Sam has already established as the foundation. Sam felt something shift in his chest. Not the weight of additional responsibility, but the expansion of possibility. This was exactly what Nathaniel and Abigail had envisioned. Not just a place that offered classes, but a place that actively healed trauma through purposeful work. Yes, he said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. Whatever you need, whatever space, whatever support, we'll make it work. There's more, Curtis said, a slight smile breaking through his usual serious expression. I've been accepted into a counseling program. Going back to school to become a therapist specializing in veteran issues. But I want to keep teaching here, keep using woodworking as part of the therapeutic approach. If that's okay. More than okay, Sam said, gripping Curtis's shoulder. You're exactly who should be doing this work. You understand it from the inside. As they discussed logistics and timelines, Sam felt his earlier doubts dissolving. This was how the estate would survive and thrive, not through one person's heroic effort, but through continuous community investment. People finding purpose here, then contributing back, creating a cycle of renewal that could sustain itself indefinitely. The afternoon wore on. The governor's representative gave a speech praising public-private partnerships and historical preservation. The local newspaper's editor announced they were running a feature series on the restoration, documenting the process for future preservation efforts. A retired architect from the city offered to teach periodic workshops on traditional building methods. Every conversation revealed another thread of connection, another way the estate was weaving itself into the fabric of multiple communities. It had started as Sam's desperate gamble, but it belonged to everyone now. That was both humbling and liberating, the weight distributed across many shoulders instead of just his own. As evening approached and guests began departing, Sam found himself back in the ballroom with just family and close friends. Julian and Kayla were slow dancing despite the absence of music, lost in their own world. Howard and Andre sat with Bonnie, sharing stories about Riverside Bend's history, about changes they'd witnessed over decades. Doreen and her husband were helping clean up, refusing assistance because we've got a system. Reverend Frome approached Sam with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this. It's been a long day." "Long 7 months," Sam agreed, accepting the cup gratefully. "I've been thinking about something Nathaniel wrote in one of those journals you found, about how buildings become homes through the hands that shape them and the love poured into every joint." Frome sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You've done that. But more than that, you've shown us how to do it. How to take something broken and make it whole through patient, careful work. I just followed his plans." "No, you did something he couldn't. You let other people help. You made it a communal project instead of a solo burden. That's why this will last when so many other restoration efforts fail. Because it belongs to all of us now." Sam looked around the ballroom, at the people gathered, at the stained glass window glowing in the fading daylight, at the walls that had nearly crumbled but now stood strong. "I bought this place for 50 cents because I had nowhere else to go. Funny how desperation can lead you exactly where you need to be." "I don't think it was desperation," Frome said. "I think it was faith. Maybe faith you didn't even know you had, but faith nonetheless. Faith that something better was possible, that broken things could be repaired, that your life wasn't over just because grief tried to end it." Sam considered that. Maybe Frome was right. Maybe beneath all the pain and loss, some small part of him had still believed in possibility. Believed enough to take a 50-cent chance on a ruined building in a forgotten town. And that small faith had been enough to build everything else upon. Ranger wandered over, his tail wagging lazily. The dog had spent the day being petted by dozens of people, accepting treats and attention with dignified patience. Now he looked tired but content, ready for the quiet that would come after all these strangers left. "Come on, boy," Sam said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Let's go home." But they were already home. It had been for months now, though Sam was only just fully realizing it. Home wasn't the building, though the building mattered. Home was this community, these people, this purpose they'd all discovered together. Julian caught up with them at the entrance. "Dad, Kayla and I are heading into town for dinner with her grandmother. You want to come?" "No, you go ahead. I'm going to stay here for a bit. Walk the grounds, make sure everything's locked up." Julian hesitated, that protective instinct still strong, despite everything that had changed. "You sure? You've been going non-stop all day. I'm sure. Go. Enjoy your evening." Sam smiled. "And Julian, I'm proud of you, of who you've become, what you've built here. Your mother would be too." His son's eyes grew bright, but he smiled. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." After they left, Sam did walk the grounds, checking locks and turning off lights, performing the small rituals of stewardship that would define his life from now on. He was the keeper of this place, the guardian of Nathaniel and Abigail's dream made real. It was a responsibility he accepted gladly, gratefully, because some broken things, given enough care and time and love, could become more beautiful than they'd ever been before. The estate was proof. And so was he. 3 months after the opening ceremony, autumn had deepened into early winter. Sam stood in the workshop on a Tuesday evening, teaching a class of 8 students the art of dovetail joints. His hands moved with practiced confidence, demonstrating the careful angles required, the patience needed to fit pieces together so precisely they'd hold for generations. Curtis worked at the next bench, helping a nervous young woman named Angela, who'd served 2 tours overseas and was still adjusting to civilian life. Her hands shook sometimes, but they steadied when she held tools, focused on the grain of wood beneath her fingers. That's it, Curtis encouraged. Feel how the wood wants to move. Work with it, not against it. This was what the estate had become, a place where broken people learned they could still create beauty, where trauma could be processed through sawdust and sweat and the satisfaction of joints that fit perfectly. The formal therapy program would launch next month, but the informal healing had been happening since Sam's first class, back in spring. After the students left, Sam remained in the workshop, cleaning tools and returning them to their proper places. Nathaniel's original tools hung on one wall, still functional, but now primarily teaching aids. Sam had added his own collection beside them, and several students had begun donating tools as well, creating a communal resource that anyone could use. The workshop had become something of a shrine to craft, to the idea that making things with your hands connected you to something larger than yourself. People who'd never touched a chisel before discovered unexpected talent. People who thought their hands were only good for destruction learned they could build instead. Sam locked up and walked through the estate's interior, performing his nightly rounds. The building settled around him with familiar creaks and sighs, a living thing now rather than a dead monument. Every room served a purpose. The library hosted book clubs and quiet study. The kitchen had become a community cooking space where people shared recipes and stories. The ballroom held everything from weddings to veteran support groups to children's dance classes. Abigail's house, as everyone called it now, had exceeded every expectation. The waiting lists for programs kept growing. Other towns were reaching out, asking how Riverside Bend had managed such a successful restoration and conversion. Julian was fielding consulting requests, documenting their methods, helping others. Understand that preservation wasn't about freezing buildings in time, but about adapting them for living, breathing use. Sam found Julian in his office, formerly a sitting room, now filled with drafting tables and reference materials. His son was reviewing plans for a greenhouse project, using Nathaniel's original garden designs as inspiration. "Working late?" Sam asked. "Just finishing up. Kayla's meeting me here in a few minutes. We're announcing our engagement to her grandmother tonight." Julian looked up, almost shy. "Wanted you to be the first to know officially. I asked her last week. She said yes." Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That's wonderful, son, really wonderful. She's special. She is, and she wants to stay here, keep building the arts programs, make this her life's work, same as me." Julian set down his pencil. "We've been talking about the future, about eventually having kids, raising them here, teaching them what you taught me about craft and care and doing things right. Your mother would have loved her," Sam said, "would have loved seeing you this happy, this settled." "I know. I wish she could have met Kayla, could have seen all this." Julian gestured around the room, meaning the whole estate. "Sometimes I think about that day we arrived. How desperate we both were, how this place looked like the end of everything instead of a beginning." 50 cents, Sam mused. "Best investment I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, father and son, both transformed by the work they'd done together. The distance that grief had created between them had closed, replaced by partnership and mutual respect and genuine affection. Kayla arrived, and Sam left them to their evening, their celebration. He walked to his room with Ranger padding beside him. The dog was moving slower these days, arthritis settling into old joints, but his spirit remained undimmed. They'd grown old together, man and dog, building a life neither had expected. Sam's room was simple but comfortable. He'd furnished it, with pieces he'd made himself, a bed frame with hand-carved posts, a dresser with dovetailed drawers, a small table and chair by the window. Lydia's photograph still hung on the wall, but Sam had added others now, pictures of the estate's transformation, photos Julian had taken of the community at work, a framed copy of Nathaniel's final letter. He no longer spoke to Lydia's photograph every night. The grief had transformed into something gentler, fond memory rather than acute loss. She was part of him, always would be, but she no longer defined him. He'd built a new identity through the work of restoration, through teaching and community and purpose. The foundation stone memorial was visible from his window, illuminated by landscape lighting they'd installed. 2 inscriptions now, linking past and present. Nathaniel's name and his own carved into permanent stone. It still seemed impossible. Sometimes that his name belonged there, that he'd accomplished something worthy of remembering. But he had. They all had. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Julian stood in the doorway with Kayla, both of them glowing with happiness. Grandmother said yes to hosting the engagement party, Kayla announced, and she suggested having the wedding here in the ballroom. Under the window, if that's okay. More than okay, Sam said. That's exactly what that room was meant for. Celebration, joy, 2 people building a life together. After they left, Sam returned to the window. The estate grounds stretched out. In darkness, pathways marked by gentle lighting, the fountain's splash barely audible. Tomorrow would bring new students, new projects, new opportunities to teach and build and heal. But tonight, he allowed himself simply to rest, to feel satisfaction in work well done, in a life rebuilt from ruins, in a community that had formed around shared purpose and mutual care. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The collapse after Lydia's death, the years of aimless grief, the desperate gamble on a 50-cent property in a forgotten town. Every step had felt impossible at the time, every day a struggle just to keep breathing. But those struggles had led him here, to this room, this community, this purpose, to watching his son find love and direction, to teaching others that broken things could be made whole, to being part of something larger than himself, something that would outlast him. Ranger settled on his bed with a contented sigh. The old dog knew this routine, the quiet end of busy days, the peace that came with being exactly where you belonged. Sam changed into sleep clothes and lay down, bone-tired but satisfied. Through the window stars emerged as clouds cleared, countless points of light in the darkness. Lydia used to say that stars were reminders, proof that even in the deepest night, there was light if you knew where to look. He'd found his light. In this building, this community, this work that connected him to craftsmen across time. In Julian's happiness, and Curtis's healing, and Angela's steady hands. In every student who discovered they could create beauty, every veteran who found peace in purposeful work. The estate breathed around him, sheltering dozens of lives now, where once it had sheltered none. Nathaniel and Abigail's dream, deferred for 60 years, was finally fully alive. And it would continue long after Sam was gone, maintained by people who understood that some things were worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth pouring your whole heart into. As sleep pulled him under, Sam's last thought was simple gratitude. For second chances and unexpected paths, for dogs who found hidden doors, and sons who didn't give up on broken fathers, for communities that gathered around shared work, for buildings that could be saved and people who could heal, for 50-cent gambles that changed everything. Morning would come with new responsibilities, new challenges, new opportunities to build and teach and serve. But for now, there was just this. Rest in a room he'd made with his own hands, in a building he'd restored with love and patience, in a life he'd rebuilt one careful board at a time. Sam Ridley had bought an abandoned estate for 50 cents, and what he'd found inside had changed everything. Not just hidden journals and forgotten dreams, but his own capacity for renewal, his own ability to take brokenness and transform it into something beautiful and strong and enduring. Because in the end, we're all just builders, searching for solid ground to stand on, meaningful work to do, and people to build alongside. That's the foundation everything else rests on. That's what makes a house a home, a building, a sanctuary, a life worth living. And Sam had built all 3, one nail at a time, with patience and care and love poured into every joint. The estate would stand for generations, sheltering those who needed it, healing those who entered its doors, just as it had healed him, just as Nathaniel had always intended. The work was never truly finished. Buildings required constant care, communities needed ongoing attention, healing happened in layers over time. But that was all right. Sam had finally learned what Nathaniel knew all along. We don't build to finish. We build to keep living, keep growing, keep creating spaces where broken things become whole. And that work, that sacred work, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.